Welcome to TSG Live Model Railroading, a program to share ideas and ask fellow modelers about their approach to the hobby. Sit back, relax, and prepare to be inspired.
Well, and good morning, everybody. This is TSG Live Model Railroading. Once again, I'm your host, John, and this is a program where we bring on other model railroaders to talk about their models, what they do, and their approach and their inspiration and all that kind of stuff. And we have a really interesting one here today. I've known this guy that we're going to be talking to for probably about 2 or 3 years now. And first met him, if I remember right, at the West Side Reunion in Sonora. You know that we've been talking about that event here as well as the Sierra Seminar for really a number of years. And Joe has some really interesting 3D modeling that he's going to be talking to us about. As you saw from the thumbnail, he has this amazing Peterbilt truck and is probably one of the most, if not the most informed Peterbilt West Side lumber truck experts, well, certainly that I know, probably the most informed one that you know as well. So with that, let me bring Joe on and we can get started here. Well, good morning, Joe. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, John?
So far, so good. So we'll see how that progresses. So why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself and about your interest in the West Side and these Peterbilt trucks that we're going to be looking at?
Sure. So I discovered the West Side maybe 40 years ago. I think it was around 1981. I was working in a restaurant. There was a flyer. I was bussing tables. There was a flyer on the table, and it mentioned this West Side in Cherry Valley, and it had a picture of a Shay on it. I had no idea what a Shay was. Asked my mom to drive me over there. We saw it and rode Shay number 7 up the hill there and took the tour of the facilities, and I was pretty much hooked. I got the Mallory Hope Farrell book on it, and that was my primary source of inspiration. So I was an SP modeler up to that point, and so I ditched SP and started pursuing the West Side. Kind of a lone wolf modeler for a long time, but eventually, going to narrow gauge conventions and stuff, I met various people, and they, took me under their wing and shared a lot of stuff. Definitely, I guess, noticed that I was highly interested and had certain skills, and there were certain areas of the West Side that had not been explored. I mean, certainly the railroad was the primary focus. Some recent readings that I'd done in some railfan literature have shown, like, when the Pickering purchased the West Side in 1958, there was very much a doubt that the narrow gauge would continue operating, but it did for several more years, and that certainly sparked interest of certainly Bay Area, railroad enthusiasts to get up there and watch these narrow gauge trains up in the Sierra foothills and in the lower part of the Sierras. So anyway, so over time, I got interested in the logging equipment aspects of the railroad, because there's been various aspects that have already looked at. Structures, like Russ Simpson had done structures. A lot of the cars, the engines are obviously the most interesting part that sucks people into this, into this railroad and modeling it. But the logging equipment just had not been explored. So that was kind of a niche that I just pursued and started digging in. Met Russ Simpson. He actually had rescued a lot of the company records. So he shared some of that with me, and that was like the spark that got me into digging in. I mean, it's taken quite some time to accumulate the information that I'm going to present here, but that was the beginning of it, and then it slowly kind of evolved. And it was a big puzzle, right? Because there was no one to help me. I was on my own, but I eventually was able to figure out a lot of stuff, and I've become the expert in all things logging and equipment related to the West Side. So
sure. So you've been a modeler for a really long time, and frankly, when people see what you've done, they're going to go, oh yeah, he's been doing this for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I started on my grandmother's kitchen table, modeling plastic models. I was a armor modeler. I built planes. I mean, I've been doing it since maybe I was 4 or 5. So yeah, I've been doing it for a long time, and I really enjoy modeling.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite part. The payoff when you actually get to finish it. The painting part is actually my favorite part, making it real, and you'll see that some of the examples there. But
Yeah,
certainly if people have questions about some of my techniques, we hope we'll have time to explore that as well.
yeah. So I should mention that too. During the presentation, if somebody has a question, they're more than welcome to type it into the text chat on the right side of our screen here, and we'll try to address those as we go. Also, certainly we have time for Q&A at the end. If you want to hold them till the end, that's also okay. But Joe's going to be here with us as long as it takes to fully explore this deep dive of really design and 3D printing and inspiration, really. So very cool. Would you like me to bring this up and we can get started?
That's sure.
All right. And there you are.
Okay. So we'll talk about the West Side as well as 3D printing and how I got into it, and definitely some hints and learnings along the way. So here we go. So if you're a prototype modeler, or even like a proto freelance type modeler, there's going to be stuff that is never going to be available as a kit, right? And you're going to have to build it in some way, right? My use case obviously is I'm interested in the West Side. I ended up getting into modeling 1951. I'll get into that in a minute with some pictures, but that's my inspiration. But so anyway, just a brief overview of what the West Side was, where and what it was. It was located about 140 miles east of San Francisco on the western edge of the Stanislaus National Forest in Tuolumne City, California, and it had a 3-foot gauge logging railroad that ran from 1899 to 1961. I don't know how well you can see the map, but you can see the red line from the left is the Sierra Railroad coming out of Oakdale, and it kind of went in an northeastern direction to Jamestown, and then over to Tuolumne, which was the end of the line. And then from there, the narrow gauge headed basically eastbound, winding up and down through the various topography, logging that whole portion of the Stanislaus National Forest. Its furthest terminus, I guess, to the east would have been right up to the Yosemite border there. As you can see, it's kind of in the vicinity of Hetch Hetchy. So certainly we're fortunate that all those rail fans got up there in the late 50s and took all these amazing photos. And this is definitely, what inspired me to get into it. As I mentioned earlier, the shays. We see number 10 there in the upper left-hand corner coming in above Camp 8. To the right there, we have Shay 8 with at River Bridge, which is one of 4 of the major bridges that were on the railroad. Very inspirational pictures there. The railroad was basically a conveyor belt of logs right to the mill. And starting in 43 and up till the end, there was these, that picture in the lower left-hand side is the kind of the truck to rail transfer area where they used these winches, which were originally steam powered. And then in the early 40s, when the trucks came, they converted them to diesel power. And these would transfer the logs from the trucks to the railroad. And then bottom right hand is one of the camps. That's Camp Niagara, which is definitely modelgenic. I mean, this railroad is very modeler. I mean, inspirational for definitely folks that want to get in, and there's some amazing modelers that model this railroad. Here in the wood. Okay, so that was the woods. Here's Tuolumne. A lot of cool stuff to model. We have the log dump there, number 10. I believe that photo was taken on a Sunday. because there's the water is very calm, and I think the train's just sitting there. So that's at the dump, and then upper right we've got some of the interesting facilities. The car shop facility there on the right, that water sprayer there, it was used to knock bark off the log cars as they headed back out to the woods. The wood switcher number 3 there on the bottom left, that engine's currently at Roaring Camp in narrow gauge, but here on the west side it was narrow gauge and ran out to the woods, and then later was converted to standard gauge. And it was the mill switcher that's in front of the Sierra Depot there in Tuolumne.
You know, it's funny, Joe, I want to cut in for just a second here. We're talking about number 10, right? Which you've shown a couple times already. People can go ride behind that over at the Yosemite Mountain Sugar Pine. Now you just brought up the number 3, which is the number 2 over at Roaring Camp now. So
yes,
right. It's really cool that West Side equipment has, I mean, that it was used so late into the 20th century so that it got, a lot of it got, you know, or not maintained, but preserved. So sorry, just an observation. Please proceed.
No, I was going to make that point, is that that's another reason that folks get into modeling this, is that, right, all the engines that survived up to the end still exist, right? And most of them run, right? I mean, number 8 has not run. Hopefully someone will have deep pockets enough to restore that, but certainly number 10 and 15 up in Yosemite Sugar Pine, right? And then number 3 and number 7 at Roaring Camp. Number 9 is in Iowa. And then the 12 is in Colorado, and the 8 is in Colorado also. I believe there's one more. I think the
14's out at Golden, sitting next to number 12, actually.
Right, and they were running at the Georgetown Loop for a while there. So so, and then there's also a lot of equipment that still exists. There's the museum up in Nevada City. I don't know if you've been there, but it is amazing.
Yeah, that's one of those places, Joe, that's on my radar to visit sometime.
Yeah, I got there in the morning, and they've restored a ton of West Side equipment, and it really feels like you're in the woods in West Side. I was just awestruck by it. So it's definitely worth getting out there. And they've restored one of this. They have 2 steam engines that they run there. Hopefully it'll get a shade sometime, but it's worth a trip there. It's truly an amazing place. Let's see, where did we leave? Okay, bottom right is the mill, and obviously that's a modeling challenge. And I do have a friend who has a fellow researcher of the West Side. I guess I should do a step back, is that myself and 2 others are probably the main researchers now on the West Side. You know, I have my little wheelhouse, but they also have theirs. One is into the logging aspect of it. Another gentleman is into structures in general, and he's going to produce a plan pack of the entire evolution of the sawmill. He's been able to figure that out. So certainly you need a bit of room to do it, but it's certainly an interesting structure to model, or a set of structures. So I mentioned that I'm into 1951. So why are you into 1951? So what happened was, there in the fall of 1950, there was a large fire that happened out there. It was called the Rice Creek Burn, and it burned out a section of the railroad that was all second growth, that had been logged earlier, but it was all second growth. So the West Side cut the line back from Camp 45 to Camp 8, which was one of the earlier, maybe the aughts. I mean, it was certainly pre-1910 logging camp, and they reestablished that as their main camp. And they used that to do salvage logging for about a year. I think it went a little longer than that. So what really inspired me is that a friend of mine, he was going to Fresno State. He was a big rail fan, and he is actually contributed a lot to Northwest Shortline. He was definitely close with Raul, who just passed away recently, and they were very good buddies. But anyway, he went up there and got a job at the West Side, and he worked out on these landings. These are where the cats would bring the logs in. And so he heavily photographed the entire operation for the entire summer. And I don't think there would be any documentation of that without him. His name is John Cummings, and I'll show a photo of him in a minute. But on the left-hand side there was this, they built a mobile loader for that season where they could put that big A-frame up. That's the photo on the left, and use that as part of a spar. And then they'd use another tree as the tail spar. And they would haul the, the cats would bring the logs into the landing, and then they'd use this mechanism with a cross line set up to load the log trucks, and then those would be brought down to the rail. The photo on the right, you can see the size of the butt of that log. That's at Camp 8, where they had to set up a reload setup. And you can see on the right, there's a bunch of equipment, which definitely fascinates me, and we'll get into that in a minute. The truck transfer would be on the left of this picture here. And here's some more again. Here's one of those diesel loaders, the conversions that was set up on the main temporarily for this salvage operation. And then in the right there, you can see they use 2 spar poles there, and that you can see the loader there on the left. And then another thing that's appealing here is that if you're doing like Camp 45, number 12 would be the camp switcher, but here, due to the short haul, they're actually using number 12 as the mainline engine to haul the logs back to the mill. And then lower left, that is John Cummings, my friend, who's very generous with his time and shared these photos with us. And here's a few more views. I think that's number 9 coming into camp. Upper left-hand corner, the building on the left is the commissary where you could buy a pair of jeans or whatever. On the right, you've got I think it was like a Sunday picture in camp. That boiler was used to heat the showers. And then lower left, you've got some interesting logging operations with 2 Cat D8s, one pulling and then a dozer pushing on the back. So you're always going to have that challenge, right? How are you going to model some of this stuff? So one way is to modify an existing model. So in this case, we have one of their service trucks, which was used to service the cats at night. So they would operate all day, then they would just park their log trucks and cats wherever, and then somebody would have to run this truck all night and lube all the cats and the trucks and get them all ready for the next day. So this photo on the left was taken by a friend of mine, Hart Corbett, on his honeymoon. He went to the West Side and took this photo, and that was inspiration for the model on the right, which was the cab is a Sylvan Models Chevy, 1.5 ton Chevy, but the frame is completely scratch built out of styrene. I even did the leaf springs. The body of the truck is all scratch built. It's got I custom cut my own wood. The tanks are scratch built, and the fuel drums actually have the correct brand of lube on them. And then this was actually the first project that I started to dabble into 3D printing, but ended up just doing it conventionally, is I was trying to do those grease pumps on those barrels, but they were just too fine for shapeways to do. So I kind of abandoned that and ended up just scratch building. And each one of those has like 15 teeny tiny parts of styrene, and the air system that powers those pumps is completely plumbed on the deck there. So this is actually one of my favorite models.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it, Joe, that's a success story right there. It looks just like it.
Thanks. I mean, I did the one compromise. Well, one thing I couldn't get, I didn't have the heart to do, is that it looks like a lot of these trucks just got beat to heck. And you can see the waterfall grill has been like rebuilt with like rebar. And that's pretty common with these trucks. I don't know what happened, why they got smashed up like that, but they just replaced them with these really crudely built, radiator guards. But I maybe now I could do it, but at that point I couldn't do it. So, but anyway, I think it captures the model. And I mean, I went to a model show. I took this along, and somebody had known about this model because I guess I just posted on Facebook, and it had moved around, and somebody said, I know that model. And he was like all excited about it. So that's kind of cool. That it was one of those RPM meets, I think the one in Richmond.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's coming up next month.
yeah, I can't go to it unfortunately, but yeah, the guy was, I think he was from Idaho or something. He was like, wow, I love that model. So that was really cool. And he was my neighbor there, so we had a nice chat. So the other option that I did pursue is, okay, so as I've established, right, the website had 5 of these loaders, and I needed them all for my truck to rail and also from cat to truck loading scenes. And this was beyond my scratch building capability. So upper left is Buffalo Landing on the west side. And then the lower is the model that I produced. It actually was produced as a kit, HO kit. So what happened here is, I kind of lucked out in a way, is that there was a modeler who was doing the truck version of that General Motors 671 engine. So he already had the engine block done. So I had to pay him to do the west side sort of industrial, because this was a General Motors industrial engine. So I had to pay him for the details on that. So I kind of saved a little bit on that. But then what happened was I was going to use the Rio Grande model's Willamette, but unfortunately his engine looked so good, it made the Rio Grande model look bad. So I have a friend who was doing Kenworth models, more modern ones, and he's a master machinist. He actually took on doing the winch set to make it look as good as the engine. So, and then I did get some Rio Grande parts for the head block, and then my friend also did the tank. I did the photo etch, and I did the wood. The one problem with this project was it took a while, and it kind of strained the relationship between my friend and I, because his family didn't understand his obsession with doing this, and it ended up costing him, some relationship points there. So anyway, based on this, I kind of wanted to not be dependent on somebody else, because it's just too difficult sometimes, right? So what do you do in that case? So I was kind of stuck with, okay, I can learn how to machine like he did, but he was a master machinist, self-taught. I would have to acquire all that hardware and learn how to do it, and that was going to take a lot of time. And then the other option was 3D printing, and I had invested a bit of time into learning the 3D CAD already, so I decided that was the route I was going to take. So let's go into the 3D printing process, start from a very high level, and then we'll work down into some real detailed stuff here. So first step obviously is to draw up your whatever you want to print. I mean, you can also purchase STLs, and there's plenty out there, but they may not be what you want. Then that file, the STL file, the standard tessellation language file, is the format that the 3D printers use to build the various layers on that Z-axis. And then you have to support the object in some sort of software, because it's going to, well, we'll go into that later, but it has to be supported so that it doesn't fail into the vat. Then it has to get sliced, which is converting into a G code is what the machine is going to understand to translate that up and down motion in the vat. And then you're going to print it. So let's get into more details here. So design. I use Autodesk Fusion 360. It's free. I mean, there is a much more elaborate pay version of that, but all the features that I would ever need are there, and it's a very sophisticated software. Lots of bells and whistles. So you can, on an individual drawing, you can create various components, and you can make them like transparent and then overlay over them, or you can actually have separate drawings and then merge them all together. So I did a little bit of both on the truck project. As we can see here, it got very complex. And sometimes if you did it in one file, it would get too much for the machine to handle. So I ended up, kind of breaking it out a bit. But as you can see, they can get extremely complex there.
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
When you found out about Autodesk Fusion 360, how much about 3D printing or 3D design did you know?
Well, I mean, there's more of the story to that. So there was another software that preceded that. I think it was Autodesk. It was a 123 Design, which I'd already printed some stuff via Shapeways. So, but then they stopped supporting that. They had all these different software, and they wanted to merge them into one. So I was forced into Fusion 360, and then there was a conversion process to convert whatever files I had already done into that. So
how was the learning curve for that one?
it's pretty big, but
Okay.
there are a lot of YouTube. I learned it all through YouTube. I don't know that I learned it correctly, and I would like to, like when I retire, which is hopefully soon, actually take a formal course and learn how to do it correctly. I mean, I just learned how I did it. I can get stuff done, obviously.
Yeah.
And, and when you run into problems, I'll just go to YouTube and say, how do you do this? And it's all there. There was this guy Lars Christensen. I don't know. Hopefully they're still out on. He had a full series of soup to nuts, sort of. He was doing those for several years, and I kind of followed him along until I didn't need that anymore.
Sure.
But like later on when we get into like tires and wheels, I was totally stuck on that, and so I just Googled it and I found a really good video, and it was step by step. So I would just basically have one monitor with the video, go down and then do the step, and then keep on going down the line until eventually I did it. So there's a lot of resources out there. It's just it takes time. You got to learn, but there's a lot of bells and whistles.
Sure. No, the reason I ask is because I know how complex I've seen the model, so I know how complex it is, and I've seen this presentation, so I know how complex this program lets you go. And I wanted to make that point to people that yes, you can do this for free. You just have to learn how to use the program. So,
right.
Yeah, very cool.
It's investing the time, and it's baby steps, and certainly some certain things I wish I knew ahead of time. But
that's why we call it a learning curve, right?
Right. I mean, that's how you learn. You have to kind of make the mistakes.
Yeah.
And I've certainly made a few, and I'll certainly show those as I go, and I'll share my learnings. So hopefully you can maybe not repeat my mistakes. Okay. Let's see. So okay. So as far as printing, there were many options that I had at the time, at least when I first got started there. There's Shapeways, and I did do some. I'll show you one thing that I did in Shapeways. What I didn't like about Shapeways, maybe it's better now, is that I didn't like the texture of the way they supported, because they use like a wax support structure there, and there was just so much post processing. I just didn't like that, and it's for the fragile detail that I'm doing. It just really didn't work out that well. I'd end up breaking things very easily. The other option I was looking at, but it was just too high of a price point, was the form printer, and they kind of evolved from the one that I think they've come up with 4 now. And then the Moai was actually a real laser type printer that was available, but I was looking at the Facebook forums, and it was just so much tweaking, and it seemed like a big pain in the butt. But eventually, these cheap Chinese mask stereolithography MSLA printers came out, and I saw what was coming off of those things, and I said, okay, this is it. Because I knew this was coming, because that's why I started investing in all this 3D CAD stuff several years before, because I knew that eventually a desktop printer was going to be there and was going to be at a price point that was appealing and accessible. So in 2019, I eventually jumped in and got the Elegoo Mars, which is an LCD UV photo curing printer, and it's kind of changed my life. So let's get into the process here. Let's go a little deeper into the process of preparing a preparing a file for printing. So what I do is I draw everything up 1-to-1. I mean, 1-to-1 scale, because it's easier, right? I just measure the prototype and then just draw it up. I'll draw it to scale, and then when I print and then things fail, I can always thicken things up. But I'll start there. I mean, I didn't do that before. A lot of stuff I was doing for the Shapeways standard, but I don't need to do that anymore. I'll just do it 1-to-1 and then thicken up stuff as I need it for the various scales, because in certain scales you can actually print stuff to scale. So this is, so I use the Prusa slicer just because I'm used to it to rescale my model. So I'll export the STL from the software, and then I'll bring it in the Prusa slicer and then rescale it to whatever scale I want to do it in. And then sometimes there's issues because it has to be a complete solid. The envelope has to be completely enclosing the object or it won't print. So there's a nice utility in there to make it solid where it does a fix and kind of patches up the model into a fully enclosed solid. Then I'll export that as another STL and then bring that into a tool called Lychee, which is a really nice, I'm only using the free version, but I'm likely going to get the pro version. It allows you to import the model in, and then you can orient it wherever, because orientation is very important for, not seeing any lines and stuff. So it's kind of a trial and error thing as to, where it goes. Usually if you just laid it flat, I mean, you're probably going to see lines, but if you rotate it to a certain angle, and there are optimum angles for various printers, and there's references out on the web as to how to do that. So anyway, you bring it in, and then what I'm showing in this slide here is the where you're doing the supporting here, and this is a Hercules HXD engine for not the Peterbilt. This is a totally different logging truck that the Westside had, and I measured this out, and so I've angled this to wherever the angle that I think will work properly. And then what this software has is this, let's see, there's the island function, if you can see on that right hand of the menu over there, and that will scan the model and it'll throw these various little red indicators under there saying you need a support under here, otherwise it's going to fail. So I'll start there, fill in all those, make sure those red dots and arrows go away, and then I'll start filling in to various other areas where I think it's, because you can use that little elevator bar on the right to kind of look and see, because you want to see the support going in and then connecting into a part, because if it's just isolated in space, it's going to fail. And so, you kind of fill it in, and then you'll print it. Well, I'll show you the slides there, but anyway, it sometimes it'll take a few iterations. Like this engine took 3 different iterations to get it to print perfectly in O scale. I did it in HO, and then I made it in O scale for a friend, and I had a few little issues where it just tore apart. And when it fails, I'll get into what happens when it fails and how you have to remedy that. But anyway, it's just something you have to. All models, the first time you're not necessarily going to be successful. Okay, so after you get that all supported out, you need to do the slicing, and the menu on the right. You select the resin you want to use. You can there's a function called anti-aliasing, which kind of fills in, if there's some stepping, it'll actually fill in some of those areas, kind of does a backfill there, and you can do various layers of that, levels of that, I should say. And then you export this off into the file that actually is going to go to the printer. So this is where it actually does the G code there. And so the newest printers actually have a Wi-Fi function, but all my printers, you have to export into a thumb drive. So basically I'll just export it into the thumb drive and then pop it into the printer.
One of the interesting things, Joe, is, when people, I think a lot of people, when they think about 3D printing, they think they're just going to get a 3D printer and it just prints like a page printer, like a piece, like the printers that print on paper. And they don't realize that you have to do all this support structure and all this other stuff. And there's even a learning curve to that, right? So instead of just getting a 3D printer and magically printing these perfect little models, I think this is valuable for people to know ahead of time before they get into it, that they have to do all this stuff like supporting it and all that. And also the various steps that are involved, because it's not magic. So this is
it is, yeah. So that was, thanks for bringing that up, is that it's, they advertise, it's all, simple, it's not, there's a learning curve for sure. I mean, like this is a totally new thing. After the Westside Arena, I actually created this image here. These are some parts. I don't know if you remember, Larry had a plan for the pond winch, Larry Tidball next to me. So I basically used that as an inspiration to create these little parts. But in HO scale, these are so tiny. But I miraculously was able to actually get a print the first time through. But in this case, in HO, those little tiny little grease cups there at the top of those little pillow blocks are so tiny. You just look at them and they'll just collapse. So, it's going to require some redesign, but this was just a lucky thing to actually happen. But then again, it's still so fragile, it breaks when you just look at it. So it'll have to be beefed up, but in O scale, it's fine. Okay, so here, so there's a lot of settings and you don't necessarily need to know them all. The most important one is the exposure time, and that's the amount of time that the light, so it's a masked light, right? It's gonna, for each layer, it's gonna have the outline of the part, and it's gonna project that light onto the resin and create that layer. So that requires some experimentation. There are defaults for every resin, which I'll start with, but then there's a tuning process, which I'll get to in shortly, as to how to really, kind of dial it in. And then a setting that I learned just recently in my most recent truck prints is there's actually a delay you can put in there, because I was having problems with actually bubbles showing up on the model. I'd never seen that before, because I was in a new resin, this Seriatech fast resin, and I had never seen bubbles in my previous resins. So somebody suggested putting this wait time in there, and it actually fixed the problem, but it did extend, right? So every time there's a layer printed, it's going to wait, a certain amount of time. And in my case, I had like a 13-second delay. So ended up being like a, 6 or 7 hour print because of that. But the prints look gorgeous. So, because the new printers can go fast, but you're not necessarily going to get the best results going fast. So you just have to know that it's going to be a set and forget it sort of situation, then come back later.
Someone has an interesting question, and I don't know, this is kind of related to what we're talking about here, but you got into 3D printing a while back.
Yeah, 2019.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see the question.
I do see the question.
Yeah.
So the price points have come down amazingly low. I'll show you my Saturn 3 printer was $300, and it's a pretty good sized printer. So right now the cost to entry is very low. It's amazingly low. And then of course there's sales and stuff that you can get things even at a lesser price, but the quality is amazing. I'll show you the quality that's coming off of these printers shortly, once we get into the use cases. But yeah, it's more the time, right? And you have to learn this, definitely. So there's two different things, right? There's the drawing part, which is a skill in itself, but then there's the printing, which is actually a whole other, and it's almost like an art. You have to definitely have to have experience, and you have to have, because you're going to have failures for sure. I still have failures. Like that engine, I had 2 failures, even though I've been doing this for a while. Each part is unique, so you have to kind of suffer through it. But definitely the price point is very low. Resin, the prices have kind of come up a little bit now. A bottle, I don't know, about this big is maybe about $30, but in HO scale, I'm doing such tiny things, I can make that last a long time. So hopefully, does that answer the question, John? Hopefully, or Runboy 7426.
Yeah, I think really, Joe, the answer to the question is it depends how high end you want to go, right? Because you could spend $10,000 to get into decent 3D printing, but it sounds like you could also spend a lot less if you're willing to go with maybe something that just isn't as high end, right? So,
well, like I said, my printers aren't more than $300. So
yeah,
and
yeah, it also depends what your budget is, right? Like, how do you define a decent price? So I'm kind of like,
exactly,
yeah. So that's why I said it's kind of interesting.
Subjective.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. Well, I guess I'll show you the results, and you can, I guess, define, or measure up to your decent, right? It's decent for me.
Yeah, and Runboy said it did answer the question. So,
okay, cool.
So thank you.
No problem. Okay, so I'm just going to go through. These are the resins that I've done. I was using the Elegoo ABS-like resin for just really up to last November. And then another resin I tried was the 3DRS, and they make some really interesting products there. Hero resin, which is a flexible resin, meaning, you can actually bend it like this. So that was definitely useful for some of the prints that I'm doing that are so fragile. And then the resin I'm still kind of learning, but getting amazingly crisp results, is the Seriatech Fast. And it seems like a lot of folks that are manufacturing parts selling parts are using this. I use the navy gray, and then the that resin right off the shelf is super brittle. I mean, I was having a lot of breakage just removing it from the support. So then the recommendation, if you go to Facebook, which there's some good Facebook groups that I use when I run into jams, is to use the Ceratec Tenacious, which is more of it has some different properties that make the print stronger. So I started with a 10%, and I eventually moved to like a 15% ratio of that, and that definitely has improved the survivability in the post-processing process of the prints. And then with your resin, you should always calibrate it to dial in the printer to the proper settings. So there's those defaults that will come like in the slicer software, but then you want to dial it in to get the best. It depends on what you're printing, but certainly the detailed stuff that I'm doing, you want to run these calibration prints. The image on the bottom is the Ceratec calibration STL, and all those little crosses and stuff you can dial in. I mean, the most critical one of these, the initial one, is that little infinity, kind of those two diamonds coming together, and what you want is to have sharp points on those diamonds. So that it's going to require you to adjust the exposure, plus or minus the default to see what works best, right? And then the other thing that I didn't know about the calibration print is that so when you begin the print, there's actually I didn't show that in the settings, but there's actually these burn-in layers, so what's happening is they do a much longer exposure because you need to have a nice connection with the build plate, right? So there's these burn-in layers, and you can specify how many they are to really lock that basically the island, which is the flat portion that attaches to the build plate. That has to be really connected, because otherwise, if it's not connected to that build plate, it's going to tear apart as more and more force is pulled against it. Because there is actually a vacuum there's suction that occurs there, and when that build plate comes down on that, there's a clear window. I'll go into that in a minute, but there's a clear window there, and actually, when the light shines on it, it's actually sticking to that clear window, and then when the arm comes up on that Z-axis, it actually peels that off of that layer. So you have to have that enough strength there so it won't tear apart, which it can happen. And then you should always do this calibration periodically, right? Definitely with a new resin bottle, you should do it every time. And then, over time, if that's resin's been sitting there, you might want to redo it again, just to dial it in again.
I can
there
see
is a life to the resins. I mean, I leave my resins in the printer. I never take them out, but they do, they'll age over time.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I could see someone, Joe, I could see someone trying to be, what am I going to call this? Trying to be frugal, right? Oh, I'm not going to run that test print because it wastes my material. But in reality, the results of, something that's properly calibrated, it's worth that small bit of material, right? To get it going.
It's really minimal.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that much. And I mean, in HO, like for the tiny stuff I'm doing, I can make a bottle last a really long time. I mean, if you're doing O scale, yeah, you're going to burn through a lot of resin. But certainly if you're doing like tiny details, I mean, you can really get it. I mean, I've had bottles last a year just on my R&D type things. But when I'm going to production, obviously you're going to start burning up some resin in a hurry. So have that ready. So I've alluded to the various components here. So let's just, this was my original Mars printer, which is now in a box. Kind of became obsolete. So the basic function, right, is you've got that lower box, which has the projector in it. On top of that is a vat where the resin goes. There's a clear window called a FEP. There's various, they have various types now of those clear windows, right? And the light projects up through that. And then there's a Z rail that's vertical, right? And then there's an arm that comes off that Z rail, and then the build plate screws onto that, right? And then there's the flat, the actual build plate, that's that flat piece there that goes down and touches down on that clear window, right? So there's when you first get your printer, you have to set it up to zero out, and there's a procedure on to how to do that. But I think that those are the major components there. And then also there's a little thumb drive, little port there to pop that in, and then you load that in, and then you got your buttons to select whatever you're going to do. And this printer didn't have that, but the newer printers that I'll show you in a few minutes have a VAT clean function. As I said, you're gonna have failures, and what a failure means is actually the part tears off. Well, so it's going up and down, and then for whatever reason, if you don't have enough supports on a part, it can just rip off because of that suction force, and then it ends up on that clear plastic film. In this old printer, you had to dump all the resin, or not dump the resin, but pour the resin off, obviously filtering it so you don't get parts into your resin, and then soak it with mean green, and then eventually it would lift up, and you'd have to use a plastic scraper to get it off. But the new printers have a VAT clean function in the utilities, and it just basically exposes the whole VAT window in one shot, and then you can just come in and just get a plastic. You definitely don't want to use metal because that thing is very fragile. You don't want to if you put a hole through that plastic, you're going to have resin. You're going to destroy your printer basically, right?
Oh,
it's going to get all over the glass and everything. So you have to be really gentle and use the plastic scraper and kind of catch the edge of it, and then you can peel that off, and maybe try to save as much resin as you can.
Yeah,
that's good to go.
That's something else, Joe, that I would bring up as something, especially for someone who wants to get into 3D printing, because I learned a lot talking to you last week, whenever that was, when we were talking about this stuff. And I didn't even know that you're dealing with really caustic materials as well, right?
Yeah, I'm going to get into that with slide on.
Okay. Yeah, please proceed then. I'll just, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the printing process, right, so when you're ready to print, right, you insert that thumb drive. Obviously, you're going to have resin in there. You hit start, and then I think we've already described all this. So it's basically going to hit zero and then slowly build up the layers, right? It's going to start with the little flat surface that attaches to the build plate is called an island, and then all the supports are going to form up like this, and then eventually it's going to start branching out into the parts, right? Okay, so here we get into the post-processing. So after you print the part, you got to deal with the cleanup, right? So it's extremely messy. You need to have a work surface that you can clean up, because you're going to get resin on something. You're going to get on the floor. You're going to get resin on the printer. I've tried not to get resin on the printer, but it just happens. It's almost impossible not to have that happen. So once the print finishes, right, it's going to stop there. I usually let it sit for about 30 minutes, let it drip off, but there's still going to be residual resin all over it. So I'd use the metal scraper, because the new printers have these nice laser embossed surfaces, so the resin really sticks to them nice, but they're hard to get off, and the plastic spatulas are worthless. So you have to use a metal scraper to get it off. And then you got to clean it. So my old method until just recently was I would use isopropyl alcohol in a pickle container. So I'd dump the part into there, agitate that, and then I would transfer that into an ultrasonic cleaner and put it in mean green and run that for maybe 5 minutes. And there is a disadvantage to these pickle containers. I mean, I've been using them just up until recently, is that small parts there's little fingers in there, and I'll show that to you in a bit, but then parts can get caught up in there and they break, and that's kind of a bummer. But the newer technique I use is I'll do the 91% alcohol, and then I'll do a denatured alcohol bath. Not really available in California anymore, but that cleans the resin off perfectly, because the old method I'd get little residual dots sometimes, and you couldn't really tell until you cured it, and then they'd show up as shiny spots on the print, and not really appealing if you're trying to sell something. And then the other learning I just learned maybe in the last few months is that you need to let the part sit for a while, because I would just, once the print was done, I would just clean it and then cure it. But now I'll let it sit for 12 hours and it actually dries out a bit. And because what I was having on really thin parts is the parts would actually warp. So letting them sit in a box, right? Note that this is all, a UV sensitive. So you have to just keep it in the dark, and then you'll have better results that way. And then once that's all clean, then you can either remove the supports before curing. I mean, it really depends on the part, or you can cure them and then remove them. And then one little, for thin parts, sometimes it's better to put the parts in water and then cure it that way. And that actually prevents some of that warping as well. So this is an early print of the truck frame. And the call out of rookie move was that I over supported that part to the point where it was completely cocooned in supports. that took me 2 hours to remove, and definitely ended up breaking some parts. So sometimes you can overdo the supports. So there is a balance, right? But that was not good, but that's how you learn, right? And here's all the cleaning products that I use. From left to right. Paper towels, very important. You're going to use a lot of those. This is very messy. You're going to get stuff on the floor. You don't want to get it on yourself, but you could. So we'll talk about the PPE you should do. Then next over is that metal scraper to remove it from the build plate. The plastic scraper I only use if I have a failed print, just to get that flat piece of exposed resin out of the vat. The silicone scraper is very important for getting some of that excess resin, try to save it. I try to get it off of the build plate, top and bottom, just to kind of save some of it. And then there's those little pickle containers where I've got the larger one with the isopropyl alcohol, and then I have the second one with the denatured alcohol. And then that Wham Bam silicone mat, I've got several of those. I got one under every printer, and I got it on my little work surface here, because you're just going to get resin everywhere. And this stuff you can just wipe off with a paper towel. So I would say that's like an essential thing, because it's just messy. And here's my recent upgrades. When I bought my most recent printer, my Saturn III, they had a big sale. It was around, it was just before Christmas or whatever, Thanksgiving, Black, whatever. So I ended up buying a new printer, and then I bought this set of, on the left is the curing machine, which I have used, and it has a timer, and it's got a turntable on it. It's got those 2 light arrays of LEDs for UV curing, and then there's also a light that comes up underneath. That works great. And then haven't used the wash station yet, but this kind of saves you some effort, because you can put the entire build plate in there and just set it up and let it run. It's got a little agitator that spins the fluid around, so it saves from that. You don't have that issue with the pickle containers of little parts getting caught in those little openings and then breaking them and then having to do it over again, which is so disappointing, especially with the fragile stuff that I'm doing. And here, these are the essential tools that I use for despruing those supports off there. The main tool is that despruing tweezer. That's I think PBL sold those. I'm not sure who sells them now, but they are fantastic, because you have a lot of tension, right? There's the supports are connected to the parts, and there's a lot of tension there. So you want to come in with those tweezers, come right in onto that part and snip that, and that's going to release that tension. Then you can come in with those blue little cutters, and this, because you're basically going to have to, remove everything and get around things. So you have to get the supports out of the way so you can get to other pieces. I mean, another way you can do it is actually to go at the raft section and then cut them at the bottom, take those off, and it just depends. So you can cut the supports at the base on that flat surface and then kind of work your way up that way too. But certainly trying to get the supports off the part is your most important aspect to prevent it from, especially with these really thin parts, right? It's because they could break. And then sometimes a knife is good, because you can run the knife just along and pop them off too. So it just depends on the part. Okay, so we did talk about safety, and contrary to what they say, this stuff is dangerous. You can burn yourself if you get resin on your fingers. I've actually got, oh, I don't need gloves, I'll just do this. I got resin on my fingers and it actually peeled skin off my hand. So yes. So anyway, protect your eyes. Always wear glasses or goggles. Cover your skin. Arms or a lab coat or a long sleeve shirt is good. Always wear gloves. You're going to go through a lot of gloves. And then the other thing that I didn't quite understand, they're saying, oh, even though the resin doesn't smell bad, it is a volatile organic chemical. I'm probably going to get a detector when I start doing a much more volume of printing. I'll probably get one of those and wear a respirator. And then you're going to have to dispose of the alcohol is going to get contaminated, and you have to dispose of that. So that's another concern, and certainly like that pickle jar will get contaminated to the point where you'll start getting resin on the parts, and then it's time to change that out. So what I do, at least for that thing, is I'll actually take that whole thing outside and put it out in the sun, and it'll turn into this gelatinous gel. So all that stuff will partially cure, and then I'll dispose of that, muck, and then wipe it out, and then start over with fresh material. So just be aware that it is messy, and you're going to need to dispose of all this material. And these are my current printers. So I moved from the Mars to the 4K Mars 3, which has a 6.6 inch mono LCD, much more, the pixels are much smaller. So you get a much more finer resolution. That's the printer that I actually did the truck that you saw in those photos. That was done with that one. And then my more recent acquisition was the 12K 10-inch mono LCD Saturn III, which has a much larger, has a 10-inch diagonal build plate. So that's what I've been using right now to print out my most current parts. But I use both of them, and let's see. Oh, another learning is that the stuff is temperature sensitive. It's got a happy place of between 70 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. So when I was doing production of some other parts during the winter, I was definitely getting some not very consistent results. And I'm in the garage. It's under the layout. So I built this booth. I can't remember the material I used. But anyway, it's got on the right-hand photo, you can see there's a temperature regulator that I have that dialed in. And then there's a tiny little desktop heater on the left-hand side. You can see it in the right-hand corner of the booth. And that keeps the booth at a constant temperature. And then I also keep my resin in there because that has to also be, heated. You don't want it to fluctuate because that'll degrade it over time. And the vat, the whole booth seals up. It's got those rare earth magnets there. So that just kind of sits there. Okay, so let's get into some actual use cases. The first one is cable reels. So I attended the narrow gauge convention in Hickory. It was like the first one after COVID, and there was a gentleman who was selling these laser cut cable reels, and I had a conversation. I said, "Those are cool. I need those for my layout." So I took them home and I measured them, and these were O scale, and they were just too big for HO. These were like 10 foot in diameter. These would be used for probably for an incline type situation, incline winch, and that's just too big for what I had. So I engaged his laser cut guy, and I said, can you do this? And he said, yeah. But then I started to think, well, maybe I could do this in 3D printing. So did a little research, started looking at my thousands of photos, and I started to find these things all over the place. You never look for something, then all of a sudden you start looking for them and you find them. So in this case there, I found in the yard in Tuolumne, I found that wick wire. That's like a 6-foot reel based on scaling that with that car there. And so I found that there. That was the biggest one I saw. And then here at the log dump, I saw these little plus shaped reels here. Those were wick wire, or Edwards. Sorry, the previous one was Edwards. This is also Edwards. And then you can see that little splash of color in that right hand photo, the little red thing. So that definitely pops. It's like a detail that would pop on your layout. And then I found these wick wire ones also at the log dump there. So definitely a essential detail. Oops. And then at the Woods Warehouse, I saw these Roebling wire rope ones as well, and they all have different sets of hardware and stuff. And then I looked at period advertising just to see, I had to do some decal artwork for this, so I found these, and so I was able to reconcile those to those photos. So we have the Edwards on the right and the wick wire on the left. And then I also was cruising around my neighborhood with my dog, and I found these, and these looked very similar in construction. So I got some measurements there just to get a sense of, how wide the boards might be and stuff in the construction. And then I proceeded to draw them up. So this one, obviously, I didn't have any reference, so I just had to scale that from photos. So this was that plus styled one, and then I drew up, and these were, fairly simple to draw up, an evening probably per reel. We have like a 30, the upper one is like a 36-inch diameter one, and you can see I did crate them as their manufacturer, right? There's like 2 layers of boards that are crosswise on them, and they're bolted together. And then the bigger one on the lower left, that's the 60-inch one that has like 3 layers of wood kind of pancaked together on each side. And then there's like a 42-inch one there on the right. And they all have different hardware, which makes them more visually interesting. And what's cool in Fusion 360, there's a McMaster car catalog, and there's parts, available to import in. So that's where I got these fasteners. I didn't have to draw them, which is nice. And oops, and this was printed on the original Mars. So I tried to do an undercoat of kind of simulated wood because I was going to do chipping over that. And then this is, so that was like the initial go at it. And then when I got the Mars 3, I printed them there. And when I did my production run of these, I did these in the Mars 3. And you can see the detail is just so much more crisp here. This is O scale. The far right ones were the 60-inch. With 2 different bolt patterns. And then, I also had it so you could put a load. You could either have it with cable and not cable. So you could just slide the cable load onto the hub. And then you can see these are the 30-inch ones on the left there. And here is the completed ones that I used for my display at the show. The upper ones are the O scale and the lower ones are HO. And I think they turned out really nice. I was really happy with these. And I think I still do have a few S scale ones out there available if somebody wants to purchase some. I think maybe 1 HO set left. I don't know if I'm going to do another run, but maybe I will. I really didn't promote these too much, but I was able to earn enough money to buy that big printer. So that was good. So, and these were pretty popular. Then moving on to probably what you came for was the Peterbilt. So this is the Peterbilt 354, 355 DT, and Reliance 450L trailers. So this is what I was going for. This was probably my favorite shot on the west side. This is one of the 354 DTs. That's Bill Berner, who is the wood superintendent. And that log was a special log for the lumber jubilee for 1950. So there was some very explicit instructions as to how to deliver this from the woods, so you didn't damage. I believe this was a sugar pine log, and we'll see that later on. But anyway, I wanted to build a model that reflected this truck like this. So this was my early attempts. This was actually inspired by a Jim Vale photo in the Gazette many years ago, and I actually have the model from his collection that inspired me. But this was a Leetown Mac, which I detailed to make it look like West Side number 22. I didn't really have information on the trailer at that time, so it was all a guess, kind of a kit bash. I mean, for most people that might be fine, but I had done a lot of research on this thing. I had almost 30 years of research to figure out what all this stuff was. That model was built 30 years ago, actually. And I thought based on the CAD experience I had, I thought I could do better. And I'd also committed to many friends because I had become the specialist on this. And this is these trucks are like iconic to the West Side. So everybody wanted one. And nobody was ever, I tried several manufacturers to try to get them to do this, and they didn't. And so it was kind of up to me. If I wanted it, I had to do it myself. So could I do better? Absolutely. So let's get into the history here. I don't know how we're doing on time, John. I know.
Yeah, we're doing okay. We're about a little more than halfway through our time, and I think you're a little more than halfway through your slides, so you're doing
okay.
Good.
All right, just ask questions as you go along.
This is the important stuff, though. Don't stop now.
I'm not stopping. This is Anyway, it was all leading to this. So down the rabbit hole. Definitely went a little cuckoo here, but anyway. So what were these trucks, right? I mean, that was the kind of the mystery that got me into this originally. Is there was a lot of misinformation. People say, "Oh, it's a Sterling, that's a Mack, it's this and that." People didn't know. There was no one that had gone into that site was able to deep dive and figure this out. So by 1940, so this truck, the 354, 355, was the majority of the West Side fleet. They did have others. They had some more modern Peterbilts that were acquired like in the late 40s, but this was the majority, and there was 11 of these. The first of which were the 354 DTs. Diesel tandem is that prefix. There's also a gas version of that. These were acquired in 1943, numbered 20 through 24. They had a wheelbase of 216.5 inches. They had a Cummins 6 HP with whopping 125 horsepower, 11 by 22 tires, channel bumpers with the vertical louvers on the radiator. They had a drive shaft brake, 45-gallon fuel tanks, 10-foot bunks, Reliance cab guards, which would be the vertical piece from Reliance, and then the West Side welded 5 horizontal pieces of rail across them, and they were painted synthetic blue, West Side synthetic blue, whatever that is. I don't know what that is. Black fenders, gray wheels, and aluminum lettering, West Side Lumber Company, Tuolumne. And here are those initial trucks at Connell Motor Company in Stockton, California, which was a major distributor of Peterbilt, and that structure is actually still there on Wilson Way in Stockton. So there's the first 5 trucks there, all lined up. And then here are 4 of them. One may have broken down on the way back to the mill. So that's shed 11 there. And then here we have number 21 out in the woods. Pretty much a central detail when modeling these things is to open them up. That it gets really hot in the Sierras. It's very dusty, so I think they wanted better air circulation. So they ended up taking the hood sides off. So that's kind of an iconic detail on the west side. Here's that same truck. As it evolved over time, technology changed, so they modernized all these trucks. The biggest detail being adding that external air cleaner. And then on some of them, they would have a lube refiner on the driver's side. And they also rebumpered them all. They didn't use those channel bumpers. This was like a 2-hole bumper, which I'm not sure. It may have been constructed by the West Side or was an aftermarket bumper. It's definitely not a Peterbilt supplied one. And you've got all these different styles of tires too, which you can go crazy. I think I identified at least 5 different styles of tires they could potentially model here. And here's that same truck in color, just painted a generic orange when they repainted these. And then here, this is the truck that my initial model that Leetown was inspired by. It has a different bumper. There was like these perforated bumper there, no lube refiner there. They simplified the lettering, putting just that number on the cowl there, and then you can see the diesel loader there on the left that I modeled. That they're in all these photos, and you can see the rail. I don't know if you can see just behind the cab the 5 rail cab guard there. This is another mystery here. Is that they started repaint. I assume that just because they were dark colored in the woods, they weren't very visible. There may have been an accident. I don't know, but this one was repainted. This is number 23, and there's another diesel loader back there somewhere. So that was repainted. And then this is the only image I have of those blue trucks in the original paint. This was a film from the 40s. I think this was like, maybe they were just showing off their new trucks during the war. Then there was a second batch of trucks. There was 3 of them that came in 1944. These are also 354 DTs, had the same cab guard configuration, but they had horizontal radiator louvers, and then the spec sheets show that they were painted and orange. Well, I actually don't have spec sheets for these, but based on the photos, they're orange with black fenders. And here's an image of those. This isn't the 1951 year that I model. There you can see that they made an adaptation there where they've extended those oil filters and put snorkels on them, and that's kind of distinctive to that period. I don't know when those went away, but they're not shown in the late 50s when all the rail fans showed up. You don't see them in those trucks. And then here's a side view showing the different size tires between the trailer and the truck. And then here's another image of actually one of the 355s in the back with the 4-hole bumper. And then there's one of the middles, this batch series of trucks, and another loader there in the background. And then we get the 355 DTs. There was 3 of those. I just recently discovered what the difference was. I didn't know what they were. They had a different rear end. They had a double reduction tandem drive. And then these were painted orange, the orange cabs and orange fenders, and they had a change in the cab guard with a used channel. And then the final one was in 47, which was also 355 DT. This is number 28. There you can see the 4-hole bumper, no lube refiner there. Some interesting tires, which I'd like to model at some point. They definitely, with that military style tire. And then here's the final one with the slotted bumper, number 30. And that's that same log that I showed earlier in the parade, in that Jubilee parade. And I did interview the gentleman, Floyd Brown, who's driving that truck there. So that was kind of cool. And then on the trailers, there was 11 of those. They appeared to all come with these trucks. There seemed to be some kind of partnership between Peterbilt and Reliance. So they were numbered 40 through 50. Each axle had 25,000 pound capacity. The reach was 8 by 10 by 20 feet long. They had a walking beam suspension, water tanks, 2 water tanks to cool the brakes. So when they were going down grade, they open a valve and they could like drip onto the drums, the brake drums, to prevent overheating. And they had 12 by 24 tires, and they were painted black with light gray wheels, and they had 10-foot bunks. And this was a huge mystery. I could never find anything on that. There's very few of these out there, but just through Facebook and networking, I was able to find that walking beam there, that whole dolly up in the foothills. And I kind of snaked my tape through that barbed wire fence and got a bunch of measurements, and that was what I used to base my model on. I mean, I had drawn that up initially just on photos, but photos are not necessarily, there's always distortion in the lenses, and I definitely learned that. But having the real dimensions definitely helped to get this right. And there's on the west side, you can see how big those tires are on that dolly. And it seems like even in the trucks, some of these big dump trucks today, they have much larger tires on the trailers. And here's that truck again with the log, just another view showing both the truck and the trailer. And then if you're modeling log trucks, you always need to bind your loads. And you can see those guys in that inserted photo at the top where they're using like a piece of pipe to kind of, and then it takes 2 of them to bind that log down to the trailer. And here's a summary just showing all the trucks and their corresponding trailers. And then this is kind of an interesting roster shot in 46. This is before, there's 10 trucks here versus 11. So that's why I figured it was 46. The number 30 is not there, but you can see the different paint schemes. And you see there's 3 of them that are blue on the left. And then there might be actually a totally different tone of orange with those orange on black ones. And then the ones on the far right are those 2 355 DTs with the orange cab and orange fenders. So a little bit of mystery to unpack there still. So how did I figure all this out, right? So Russ Simpson had rescued all the West Side records from a dumpster, and he had them at his house. So I was able to get all the serial numbers for all these trucks and the trailers as well. So once I had those, I could get, there are build sheets for sale by a few different sources where they get them off of microfilm. So I was able to get those build records, and then they had like part numbers on them because each truck was actually custom built. So, and then the other lucky thing that happened is when Peterbilt moved their plant from Newark, California to Denton, they also tossed all their engineering drawings into the dumpster, but some gentleman had enough foresight to rescue those. So I was able to, through networking, get access to those. So I was able to reconcile those actual engineering drawings to those build records. So I was able to get the actual parts, because you're going against restored trucks, you don't know what parts you're getting. And there's so many variations. And then also period advertising was helpful too. And also just going out the field, measuring trucks, taking lots of photos and learning how to measure correctly. That's a whole other thing. And then the other thing that I learned is that the restored trucks aren't what maybe the real truck was, because they had to piece it together, because whatever's left, whatever survived. I mean, this is almost 80 years ago. And then definitely networking and just driving around and finding stuff is fun for me. I enjoy just the hunt of finding stuff. So these are the 4 trucks that I based my model on. And ironically, all of these have a connection to my town here. So I actually have access to all of these. The one on the upper left was the one that I measured extensively initially. And the gentleman who owned that was a machinist and also a model railroader, it turns out. So he actually helped me measure the heck out of that thing. And then the upper right hand corner, that's an actual 354 DT, which I measured. And then the one on the left, the green one, is probably the most pristine. It's a 1940, I believe, or 41. I think it's a 41, but it's the most pristine restoration out there, and that one was accessible to me. And then the one on the bottom right was actually, those bottom 2 at one time were both 5 minutes from my home. And the one on the bottom right actually is a 1940, but it has a 47 frame on it. So I use that heavily. I had 24/7 access to that. So whenever I had an ambiguity, I'd run over there and get some measurements. So with all that data, you have the measurements, you have the photos, I had to draw it all up. So there was a lot of drawings and sub-assemblies. I drew up, the frame, all the proper cross members, everything. And it took about a year. I think all that data acquisition was around just before COVID. So it was 2019, I think, when I got those initial measurements, and then 2020 spent pretty much the whole year drawing this thing up. So what are the results here of all that? So this was the initial, this is like phase 1, the first cut. So this is the shapeways print of that Reliance trailer, which, turned out pretty decent. I did use aftermarket wheels for those, which weren't correct size. They're not the 12/24s, they're 11/22s. And the insert there is what the walking beam looks like in a catalog view. And I did, I modeled the air cans and everything, so it's got the full brake linkages on it. And there's the initial truck. This was done on the Mars, and you can see the commercial wheels there, just to see how things fit together. And I was crazy enough to put the battery trays in there, so you can actually model it with the battery trays open, the battery doors open, if you wanted to show the batteries under there. And here's the frame painted up, and there you can see the battery trays on either side, and the fuel tanks, and the running gear, and the fuel tank shields, and everything. And then here's the completed truck. This actually was just kind of a piece together truck, because I was making each part, and this photo was actually blue tacked together, so if you looked at it, it would fall over. But that was that initial truck, which still was pretty good. I could have said, okay, I'm done here, just refine a little bit. There you can see the battery door open under the driver's side, and the door open. Not offering it with the door open, that makes it a lot harder to print. There you can see the interior, which is correct to this truck. And there's another view of the interior. It even has little toolboxes there, and you can see the battery underneath the driver's side. And there's another view there. Oops. And there's the combo together. That's in that original blue scheme. That's truck 20. So I didn't think that was quite ready for prime time. So there was some changes that needed to occur there. So the next generation refinement. So the discovery is that, as I said, that these restored trucks are sometimes pieced together, so it did not have the correct rear end in it. And I just couldn't stomach that. So I had to make some modifications. I actually had kind of done a kit bashed rear end, where I used parts from different trucks to kind of piece together. It was all really a fictional rear end. So I had to make it correct. And then the driveline brake is actually like a parking brake on the truck that's on the driveline, and I was actually very intimidated by doing that, but I had promised that that was going to be a feature, so I had to do that. Then I didn't have an exhaust system. I hadn't done the mirrors and the wheels. I didn't want to be beholden to a manufacturer to do it, and they weren't correct. So I said I need to learn how to do this. So that was the next step. So YouTube comes to the rescue. There was a very good, very detailed video on how to do this. And also I learned how wheels go together after following his and it didn't look right. So then I had to go back and look at my photos. Oh, that's where I made a mistake. So anyway, I came out with these. So it's the correct wheels. This is for the trailer, and the correct tire pattern. So I was like really jacked about that. That was like a huge aha moment. And then here they are. These prints actually aren't the ones that were on the model that you saw in the earlier. Oh, this is resin. Sorry. It's all resin. So on the left is the trailer tires with the correct tread pattern. This is in the Seriatech blue. And then on the right is the truck tires and wheels that were all correct. You know, the correct wheel and the correct tire pattern for at least those early trucks. And here's that big ugly driveline brake thing that I was intimidated by, but I just had to do it. So it's like, you know, as you can see, it's like caliper disc brake. So once I got it drawn, printing that has been a serious challenge because, you know, it's just so fine, paper thin. But I have been able to figure out how to get that done in HO, and then there's that linkage piece, which is super fine too. So I'm still kind of struggling with that, but I did get it drawn. So that was a victory. And here's the corrected rear end with the correct frame mounts. And that was probably the most complicated piece. And then those torsion bars, they were all correct for it now. Fortunately, the spring packages and the axles were correct, and the worm gear. And then the mirrors were a challenge because they were, I could go photo etch, but what I had attempted to drill the cab out, but the pillars are so fine there that it was gonna, the whole thing would fracture. So I looked at that Hero resin, which has that flexible properties to it, and I decided to go with that. And that's in the completed model. So here, this is the model that probably brought you to this presentation. This was all done on the Mars 3. This is Westside number 28, 355 DT. Here you can see it's got the full running gear there. The little pintle hook in the back, they used a pin. They kind of pin it, not the kind of clamp type. So that's actually done in that flexible resin because that part is so thin, so it can flex. So when you insert the trailer hook in there, it won't break. And there you can see all the various details, the cab guard, and all the wood parts here are actually plastic or resin. And here's a view here. Let's see what note. Oh, the headlights are, I didn't, well, a lot of times they'll just have a filled in headlight, and I wanted to actually have it look like a real light. So I made it hollow inside, and then I used the Molotow marker, chrome marker, to make it shiny. And then I used a piece of clear plastic to overlay that. And I think that came out pretty nice there. Let's see what else. Oh, the other thing that, a couple things here, is that these trucks all had open vents. So I've actually created a small overlay part so you can actually model it with the vents open. And then the other really challenging thing here was the tread plate there on the cowl, because for the guy that gets up on that platform, he's got to crawl up on the running boards, and then there's a little drop step there. So he steps on that, and then there's like tread plate on the cowl. And then there's a grab iron up there on the platform to pull himself up. So that was extremely challenging. And then here you can see the mirrors, which I had in HO, I had to scale up a little bit because they just were too fragile, but they have enough flex that they'll give, they won't break. And here's a view of the trailer, the whole setup there. And the tires here were done in that 3DRS resin versus the Seriatech, which I showed earlier. And that's now with the correct wheels all the way around. So any sane person would say, you're done, go to production. But there is a problem still in that the front axle was to scale, and it was this very fragile. I actually ended up breaking it when I put the bumper on, the very last piece that just snapped. So I've got to make that more robust. And I've already put a lot of effort into making it easier to assemble. That's the point of that model, was to see what the kind of the hang-ups are, what the issues are. So I've kind of worked out some of the bugs there. And then since I had kind of promised to do this in O&S scale, some of the O-scale folks, a lot of people model that later period. They had all of the modifications with the open hood and the air filters and the lube refiners. And so I have to do, they want that since they're willing to pay for it. And then that recent discovery about the different axle on 335 DTs, I also need to do an engine. Now that I have the engine compartment, if I got to do an engine, so I have to go to one of these trucks and measure it up. And then the other kind of concern is that I've got a lot of interest in this thing. HO I can do without a problem at home, but definitely the larger ones, I may have to outsource this. So that's kind of a challenge for me, but HO would be first since it's so close to being complete. And so this is what the current state of the art printers can do. So as I was putting that model together, I was hoping to do a model with all prints in this 12K printer. I just ran out of time for the West Side Reunion. So this is the level of detail that now you can get. And this is a $300 printer. You can see the Peterbilt. I had not drawn up that Peterbilt logo because I didn't think it would be readable, but you can actually, this is HO scale. It's readable, right? And look at the vent detail, and then those latches. I drew the latches up just like the real thing, and you can see all the latch detail there. So that was just a little mock-up I did before I put the cab on, before I broke the axle. Anyway, so I think we got to the last slide here. So lessons learned here, right? This isn't for everyone. It's, they say, oh yeah, just plug and play. It's not, right? It requires a lot of patience, and there's a lot of iterations. You gotta, accept that things are going to fail, right? You're going to have failures, and you learn from that. And I still have parts fail all the time. So it's, even if you are experienced, it's just a nature of the beast. You got to support the models correctly, and that comes through experience. Heavier supports are usually better. Don't assume that it won't tear itself apart, because it can, right? There's a lot of force there when that thing peels off the FEP. Doing the post-processing can be very time consuming. So, if I'm offering another model, I'm not going to do that on my own because it's not viable for me. So I would provide the model with the supports, and the modeler would have to do that. And then you can never have too big of a printer, right? Because everybody wants O scale now, and I'm not sure that an O scale print will even happen even on my large printer. And let's see. Oh, and you think that was crazy. This is something else I want to do. Through my research, I figured out that the West Side had these Ross carriers. They had a lot of these in the plant there in Tuolumne, and I spent years and years and years trying to find one, and eventually, just through some random search on the web, I found that the Sterling City, California Museum, there's a gentleman who actually restored this, and this is fully operational. Everything works on it. So I took a few days and went up there and measured this actually in pouring rain, and fortunately did not kill myself, because that top of that frame is almost like 9 feet off the ground. So, and I was by myself, but I did measure this up. So this is a future project that I want to take on, and I think I can make that happen. But it's got there's so many different subsystems on that. So similar to the truck, you have to break it down into smaller parts. Anyway, that's it. Questions?
Right. So this is a great time for people. You've done such a thorough job explaining everything. There haven't been a lot of questions coming through the live chat.
Oh, okay.
So
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, with that new, what was that thing called you were just showing a second ago?
Oh, you want me to go back?
Sure. What's that called?
It's a straddle carrier.
A straddle carrier.
Yeah. So what this does, right? This was used to move. So the lumber would come out of the mill, right, onto this green chain, right, a continuous chain, and they would pull all that off and classify that by various species, right? So that would then be formed into a package, basically I think a 4 foot by 4 foot package. Then this thing could drive up onto that package, and those arms underneath it, I think it's called a hook, right? That thing lowers down and it goes out wide and it clamps on, right?
Yeah.
And then they'd lift it up and then they could just zoom it out to the drying stacks where they would then unload it again and then put it in a stack and get it to dry. So
it's a fancy lumber carrier.
Yeah, it's an interesting machine for sure. I don't know, it was interesting to see it in person, because I did have catalogs for this, but actually finding one was, pure luck.
Yeah, and there are plenty of people, I'm sure, who would love to have this on their crazy logging layouts, right? So
yeah, it's a big one, but I mean, yeah.
I'm going to put it back on this one again, so people will have a way to contact you if they need to. This is, people. I'm really surprised, to be honest, Joe, that people are in the thing going, "How do I get one? How do I get one? How do I get one?" of the trucks, Somebody was actually making a request for a fuel truck earlier.
So,
I don't know.
I don't know if I'm taking a request. I got I have 110 trucks already on order in 3 different scales right now. So I'm up to my eyeballs in work. And this is something I do when I have spare time, which isn't very often.
What's that, right?
Yeah. So it's, mostly weekends is when I have enough energy to work on it. So
sure. So I'll ask the questions though, because there are 2 questions that I would have if I were watching this and needed this for my layout, if I had a layout. And that would be, 1, how much would it cost? And 2, how do I order one from you so that I can get one myself?
Okay. So just a little background is that, even though the West Side had these, this was pretty much your typical West Coast logging truck, off-road logging truck. And I've looked at some spec sheets for a lot of other companies, and they're spec'd exactly the same. And this was, your wartime war production board, gave Westside permission to have 5 of these, but then all these other companies, Pickering had some, Fruit Growers, all the way up, you'd get those. And then this continued on until they had a more modern truck post-war, right? But this is really a 30s era truck that, kind of came into the 40s and then the war came. So, you were kind of frozen as far as technology was concerned. So this would be a truck that you would see on the West Coast. Mm-hmm. So if you are interested, I don't have a price point. It's for HO, it's 70-ish. I haven't done any of the rescaling for the other scales, so I can't really say that, but delivery, I'm hoping in the fall is where I'm kind of shooting, depending on, I still have to do instructions and all that sort of stuff. But right. So if you want to order, just hit me up on this email address, and I can add you to the list. And then when I'm ready, I'll put the order book out, and you can sign up officially. But if you're interested, certainly get your name on the list now. Yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to do more than 1 run of this. We'll see. But
But the other thing, just to be clear about, is so it's about $70, somewhere there around there, and to contact you using this email, camp8models@comcast.net. And then the other thing to be clear about is that it will come actually disassembled, right? They're not going to get that yellow truck you showed us in the pictures, or
it was orange, but no, that's there's a lot of work that went into the finishing of that model,
right?
Because I'll certainly give you instructions on how to paint it. I can give you some suggestions for weathering, which I definitely learned doing that. But it's you gotta. That's a whole other skill set, is the weathering techniques, that I've learned over the year. And that's actually my favorite. That's the payoff, right? After doing all this work is that was the big wow thing, where it's like, wow, this looks so good. I got to throw that out there. It's ready. It's ready at least to show.
And it's funny. This is a little backstory here. I don't know. I think it was 3 years ago, the first, or somewhere around 2.5 years ago, the first time I met you at the West Side reunion. And I saw that truck.
That was the blue one,
yeah, the original one.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my goodness, we need to make a video about this. And let me turn you're like, no. I understand now, because you knew that you were working on what I saw this last time, the one that you just showed.
Yeah.
And that one's even more impressive. Obviously, I didn't think at the time it could be any more impressive.
Oh, it's gonna. As you saw on that last print there, that was. I mean, it's even better. I mean,
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know if I can leave that logo on there or not. If, the manufacturer's gonna, if Peterbilt will come after me and say I can't do that.
Yeah. Well,
But
if
but
I
the
were in
detail
charge
on
of
the new printer is amazing, even more spectacular than what that model was.
if I were in charge of Peterbilt, I would be ordering one from you to put it on my desk in my office. That's
Yeah.
how good it is. So, but yeah, I mean, that's something to see. And I was telling people in the chat, you got to see this thing in person. I mean, it's even better in person than it is on the pictures. And I know when I saw it, I thought, oh, if I could just shrink myself down, I could drive away in that thing.
Well, I mean, that was actually the goal.
Yeah.
Is to make it look scaleless. I mean, there
Yeah.
are some compromises, but so that's what, I don't like. I mean, you see my other models, right? You can't really tell their HO scale, and that's been my goal. And what's good about this technology is you can actually, if you get away from shapeways, you can actually do this, I mean, if you can get it to print and not fall apart and handle it, so I have to beef things up, but you can make things look, real, right?
Oh yeah.
Which you couldn't do before.
Yeah.
Not on your own, at least. You're dependent on other folks to create a kit, and they're going to make compromises. I mean, you always have to make compromises, right?
Yeah. I've often mused that the narrow gauge modelers tend to usually be the best modelers. And I think it's because a lot of times they're modeling stuff that there aren't kits for. So if you want it, you have to make your own,
Right.
which means you practice your modeling skills a lot. And it really shows. And just the detail of the paint job and the weathering on that truck is just, outstanding. I haven't seen models like that too often. And so that's why when you're like, oh yeah, I'd like to do that show with you, I'm like, oh yeah, we just definitely do that, because I joke sometimes about people being inspired by things, but this is a truly inspirational job of modeling. So yeah,
I think I like to make the models look real. I want to make them look like they're grounded in the world, right? Because a lot of times you see models and they're not. They're just pristine, and that's, I mean, once they come off that factory floor, right, the UV light is going to fade things out. You're going to have, all kinds of effects come up off the ground, and and the rain and the streaking and all that kind of stuff, which, obviously that's, a lot of people put that effort into the locomotives, which, the state of the art of that is amazing. But I like to do that to all my models to make them look real.
Weathering happens everywhere, right? From dust and dirt to exhaust.
Yeah, it even happens to me.
Yeah, right. I wasn't thinking that way, but yeah, I guess it does. How do you get that white streaks?
A lot of Sierra dust.
Yeah. Oh man. So yeah, I'm not seeing any questions popping up in the chat here. So I think with that, unless there's anything else you want to talk about, we can maybe call this a done deal. And
I know you had brought up the West Side Reunion and the event, which was actually it's been going on for 35 years. And I mean, the other appeal that I don't think you mentioned is just the setting up there in the Sierra foothills is just in the spring is just gorgeous. So even if you're not a fan, just getting out and driving around, it's just like several spouses go out and take pictures of the wildflowers and all that. It's just a beautiful setting in itself, beyond just getting to see some really amazing model work and great clinics and everything.
Sure. And the camaraderie too is really good there. I mean, you see the same people year after year, and a lot of those same people are going to both the West Side Reunion and the Sierra Seminar, which is always on the following day.
Right.
And the clinics this past time were outstanding as well. So yeah, I didn't think about that. Looking at the model of the truck and realizing that that's a scaled down model, like that exact truck worked only miles away from where we were standing when I saw it. You don't, that doesn't hit you until you really think about it. And it's just, just wow, outstanding. Just fantastic.
Joe. It's been a bit of a journey, but I enjoy the process, and I mean, I've learned a lot and shared it with a lot of folks. So
yeah, it's obvious that it's a labor of love, because I don't think someone doing that for a paycheck just for a paycheck would ever go to the lengths that you've gone to and the detail that you've gone to. I mean, all the research, becoming basically the preeminent expert on these Peterbilt trucks.
Funny you bring that up is that I was at a truck. So after the West Arena, after I realized I had some gaps in my model, there was a truck show up in Plymouth, and Plymouth, California, which is also beautiful this time of year also. And I ran into the guy who has that green truck at his property. And he's the one that also has all those engineering drawings in his house. So he said that me and the expert of Peterbilt may be the preeminent experts on these early Peterbilts in the world for some reason. Right? It happened.
So you never thought growing up, I'm going to become the preeminent expert on Peterbilt logging trucks, you know?
Yeah, I did not. It just happened. I enjoy the digging. It's fun.
Yeah.
I like the mystery of it.
Sure. And that's one of those things, you know, people say that model railroading is a very multifaceted endeavor. And I think that's really what they're talking about, because research is absolutely one of those. If you're into research, boy, I mean, that's years of enjoyment for you, right? Uncovering the details of things. And it's almost like archaeology, right? You're digging another bone up and dusting it off and figuring out what's what. It's cool stuff. So
big puzzle, but
yeah,
I enjoy it.
Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Just, inspired. I don't know that I'm ever going to build a truck, or I will maybe not even ever have a model railroad, to be honest, but I find it really interesting and informational about how you went about it. And I think that there are probably a lot of people out there that are going to see this and go, yeah, I can do that. I think I'm going to start my journey today. And that's really what I'm after in sharing these stories. So thank you.
Well, the tools are there, and they're actually, I mean, the price, I mean, the actual investment is not that significant. There is the time part. So,
right. But it's a hobby, so the time doesn't count.
That's true.
So cool. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
With that, we'll go, and I'll talk to you in a couple minutes when the music's over.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody for watching, and we'll catch you on the next episode of TSG Live, whatever it is.